On a quiet little street, where old apartment buildings stood closely side by side, Lena silently wheeled her bike into the parking lot, her eyes showing a hint of exhaustion after a long day at work. She was a 37-year-old woman working at a therapy spa where she helped clients relax with physical therapy treatments. But despite her job being completely respectable, society still looked at her with skepticism. Lena lived with her only daughter, Sophie, in a small, aging apartment. Life wasn't easy, but she did everything she could to provide for her child. Sophie, a smart and understanding 10-year-old girl, never once blamed her mother for their struggles. Instead, she became Lena's biggest source of strength. In that very same apartment complex, a young man had just moved in across from Lena's home. Ethan, a 27-year-old freelance musician, was born into wealth but chose to live independently. He didn't care about the privileges of his family. His only desire was to find inspiration for his music. To Ethan, moving here was just another adventure, a way to discover the kind of everyday stories he had never experienced before. Unlike other women around him, Lena showed no interest in Ethan. She even avoided his gaze, as if she didn't want anyone stepping into her world. But that very mystery only made Ethan even more curious. Whenever she worked at the spa, Madeline, a successful businesswoman, would often stop by and talk to Lena. She treated Lena like a younger sister, always offering her life advice. But Lena never shared much about herself. There were wounds in her heart that she refused to let anyone touch. Ethan had no idea that meeting Lena would change his life forever. Ethan was never the type to be easily drawn to someone, but Lena was different. She didn't seem to care about his presence, wasn't impressed by his looks or his easygoing charm like most women. That distance only made Ethan more intrigued. One evening, Ethan was having drinks with his best friend at a bar. When the conversation turned to Lena, his friend smirked and said, "Do you think you could get her to notice you?" Ethan chuckled, raising his glass. "If I wanted to, it'd be too easy." It was just a harmless joke between friends, but for some reason, Ethan couldn't get Lena out of his head. He started paying more attention to her, looking for ways to strike up a conversation. But Lena kept her distance. Even when they crossed paths in the apartment complex, she would only give him a small nod before walking away. One day, Ethan injured his hand while cleaning his apartment. It wasn't serious, but bad enough that he couldn't play guitar. With no other choice, he decided to visit the therapy spa, the place where he knew Lena worked. When he walked in, Lena looked slightly surprised but quickly masked it with her usual indifference. "What do you need?" she asked, her tone calm. "My hand's injured. I heard you're the best." Lena didn't respond. She simply gestured for him to sit down. As her hands gently touched his wound, Ethan felt a warmth beneath her cold exterior. At that moment, he realized Lena wasn't cold at all. She was simply protecting herself. After their encounter at the spa, Ethan started looking for more ways to be around Lena. He often sat at the cafe near the spa, waiting for her to finish work, just to catch a glimpse of her for a few seconds. But Lena didn't change. She remained distant, the same quiet and reserved woman who kept everyone at arm's length. Ethan wasn't discouraged. He noticed that every morning, Lena would walk Sophie to school, and every evening, they would stop by a small bakery to buy pastries. Gradually, he started coincidentally appearing in those moments. The first time Sophie saw Ethan, she curiously observed him. Unlike her mother, Sophie wasn't standoffish. "Are you my mom's friend?" Sophie asked, blinking up at him when they ran into each other outside the bakery. Ethan chuckled, crouching down to meet her eyes. "I'm trying to be." His answer amused Sophie. After that, she started mentioning Ethan in front of Lena. Lena never reacted, but every time Sophie casually brought up Ethan's name, she felt something she couldn't quite explain. One evening, it began to pour heavily. Lena hurriedly led Sophie home, but despite the umbrella, both of them were soaked. Just as they stepped into the apartment complex, a warm voice called out from behind, "Need a towel?" Lena turned around to see Ethan standing there, holding out a dry towel. For some reason, at that moment, her heart wavered. Ethan was no longer just some nuisance she tried to avoid. He was slowly becoming a part of her world. As time passed, Ethan and Lena's relationship grew deeper. He was no longer just the charming musician who lived across the hall. He had become a part of her small, quiet world. The mornings when Ethan walked Sophie to school, the evenings when he waited outside the spa just to walk Lena home, the rainy nights when he silently stood outside with an umbrella, Lena had stopped avoiding him. And then, one late evening, as Ethan walked Lena to her door, he pulled her into his arms and pressed a gentle kiss to her lips. Lena didn't push him away. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to love someone. From that night on, they were officially together. Ethan spent every free moment with Lena and Sophie, finding joy in the simplest moments they shared. One evening, Ethan looked at Lena and smiled. Tomorrow, have dinner with me? I want to take you somewhere special." Lena nodded, completely unaware. She had no idea that this dinner would change everything. The next evening, Ethan took Lena to a grand, luxurious estate. The moment Lena saw Madeline standing at the door, she froze in place. "Why do you look so tense?" Ethan chuckled, squeezing her hand. "It's just dinner." But Lena could feel the coldness in Madeline's gaze. And she knew, to Madeline, she wasn't a guest, but an intruder. The next evening, Ethan took Lena to a grand, luxurious estate. The moment Lena saw Madeline standing at the door, she froze in place. "Hey, do you look so tense?" Ethan chuckled, squeezing her hand. "It's just dinner." But Lena could feel the coldness in Madeline's gaze. Dinner was silent and tense. Then Madeline finally spoke, her voice ice cold. "How much do you want?" Lena blinked in confusion. "Excuse me?" "Money. Name your price to leave my son." Ethan slammed his hand on the table, his voice sharp. "Mother, stop it!" But Madeline's expression remained indifferent. "Do you think I don't know who you are? A woman working in a therapy spa, living in a rundown apartment, raising a child alone? You are not worthy of my son." Ethan turned to Madeline, his voice firm. "I love her, and you have no say in this." Madeline smirked. "Then, as of today, you will not receive a single cent from this family." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Fine." Lena turned to Ethan, expecting him to waver. But he didn't. From that moment, he knew if he wanted to be with Lena, he had to prove that he could stand on his own. From that day on, Ethan no longer received financial support from his family. Although he still lived in his small apartment in the old complex, his life had completely changed. He started performing at bars and cafes, earning only enough to scrape by. On nights when he didn't have gigs, he worked extra jobs, delivering food, waiting tables, anything to earn an honest living without his family's money. But no matter how little he made, every time he got paid, Ethan gave part of his money to Lena, telling her he wanted to help support Sophie. At first, Lena refused, but Ethan was persistent. "I'm not some spoiled rich kid, Lena. I want to be a man you can rely on." Looking into Ethan's sincere eyes for the first time, Lena allowed someone into her life. Life wasn't easy for Ethan and Lena, but they fought through it together. Ethan continued making a living through music, taking on extra jobs just to support himself without relying on his family. Lena still worked at the spa, unaware that a storm was quietly approaching, one that would shatter the peaceful life she was desperately trying to hold on to. One afternoon, Victor, Lena's father, Pierre, appeared at the spa's entrance. His face was worn out, his clothes disheveled, his eyes filled with desperation. "Lena, I need your help." His voice trembled. Lena clenched her fists. How long had it been since she last saw him? A father who only knew gambling, who never cared for her unless he needed money. "I don't have any money," she said coldly. Victor fell to his knees, begging. "I owe them money. If I don't pay, they'll kill me. Please, just this once." Lena closed her eyes, forcing herself to stay strong. "Figure it out yourself." With that, she turned and walked back inside the spa, leaving him kneeling there. She didn't know that this decision would set off an irreversible chain of events. Rejected by Lena, Victor found another way out. He remembered Ethan, the son of a wealthy, powerful family. If Ethan and Lena stayed together, wouldn't he be able to take advantage of that? So Victor went to Madeline. Madeline sat across from Victor in an upscale cafe, sipping her tea as she gazed coldly at the desperate man before her. "Why are you here?" Victor lowered his head, trying to appear pitiful. "I just want what's best for my daughter. I think we can work together." Madeline smirked. "Work together? What do you mean?" Victor leaned in. "You want Lena out of Ethan's life, don't you? I can help, but I need a little motivation." Madeline let out a sharp laugh. "Are you asking me for money?" Victor swallowed hard. "Let's call it compensation for my sacrifice." Madeline remained silent for a moment, then pulled out a check and placed it on the table. "Do it, and never show your face to me again." Victor grinned in satisfaction. He had gotten what he wanted. But what he didn't know was that this deal would lead to his own tragic downfall. After receiving the money from Madeline, Victor disappeared for a few days. Lena had no idea that her own father had betrayed her, nor did she know that he was silently working on a cruel plan to separate her from Ethan. Until one fateful evening, as Lena finished work and returned to her apartment, she saw Victor waiting for her at the entrance. But this time, he didn't look desperate. Instead, he was well-dressed, his expression calm, as if everything had already been decided. "It's been a while since we had a proper talk, my daughter." Victor smiled, but there was something unsettling in his eyes. Lena felt uneasy. "What do you want?" Victor stepped closer, his voice steady. "I think you should leave Ethan." Lena froze. "You have no right to interfere in my life." Victor let out a chuckle and pulled out a thick stack of cash, tossing it onto the ground in front of her. "This is enough for you to start a new life. Stop clinging to someone who doesn't belong to you." Lena felt a chill run down her spine. "Where did you get this money?" Victor sighed, shrugging. "Just a little gift from Ethan's family. They don't want you ruining their son's life." Every word stabbed straight into Lena's heart. She stared at her father, her eyes burning. "You sold me out. For money?" Victor didn't answer. He simply smirked. "Everyone has a price, Lena. This is yours." Lena trembled, her fists clenched. And then suddenly, she picked up the stack of money, raised it high, and threw it over the balcony. The bills scattered into the air, drifting down in front of the stunned crowd below. And then, chaos erupted. People rushed forward, scrambling for the money. In that moment of chaos, Victor took a step back, his eyes widening in panic as he accidentally slipped on the stairs. Lena barely had time to scream, "Dad?" But it was too late. Victor tumbled down, his head hitting the concrete with a sickening thud. Blood spread across the pavement. The crowd fell silent. Lena rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside her father, her hands trembling as she touched his face. "Dad, Dad, wake up." But Victor was no longer breathing. She didn't hate him anymore. She wasn't even angry. All she felt was an unbearable sorrow. Victor's death left an unerasable scar in Lena's heart. She had hated him all her life. He had betrayed her in the worst way possible. But watching him take his last breath right in front of her, Lena couldn't stop the pain from consuming her. The funeral was simple. Few people attended. Just Lena, Sophie, a couple of neighbors from the apartment complex, and Ethan. Lena stood silently in front of the grave, staring at the engraved name of the father she had lost. She didn't cry, but her heart had never felt this heavy before. That night, Lena sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, staring at the ceiling. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the loss, the suffocating guilt, pressed down on her chest. She felt trapped between the past and the future, unable to move forward. Could she really let Ethan carry all this with her? Did she have the right to hold on to him when all she brought him was pain? After the funeral, Ethan walked Lena home. They sat in silence in the dimly lit room, neither of them speaking. Finally, Lena took a deep breath and whispered, "Ethan, let's break up." Ethan looked up in shock. "Lena, what are you saying?" Lena smiled faintly, but her eyes held a sadness deeper than words. I'm exhausted. I don't want to continue like this anymore." Ethan reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "I don't care what's happened. I will always stay by your side." Lena shook her head slowly. "You gave up your family for me, but I can't let you lose anything else. You deserve a better life." Ethan clenched his jaw, pain flashing in his eyes. "What about you? Don't you need me?" Lena turned away, unable to meet his gaze. "Ethan, I love you, but I can't be your burden anymore." Before Ethan could say another word, Lena stood up, walked to the door, and gestured for him to leave. Ethan had no choice. At last, he stood up, walked out, but before leaving, he looked back at Lena one last time and whispered, "If this is what you want, I'll respect it, but I will never forget you." The door closed behind him, and Lena collapsed onto the floor, silent tears streaming down her face. After breaking up with Ethan, Lena decided to leave the city. Using the money she had saved over the years, she opened a small cafe in a peaceful town. In this new place, she started over, focusing on work and raising Sophie. Ethan, after parting ways with Lena, decided to study abroad. He wanted to better himself, to find his way after everything that had happened. And just like that, they walked away from each other, following separate paths. Neither of them knew that fate had not yet finished writing their story. 2 years later, Lena stood behind the counter of her small cafe, the place she had poured her heart into over the past 2 years. Her life had found peace again, but she didn't know that fate had never truly let go of her and Ethan. After that first encounter, Ethan didn't disappear again. He became a regular at the cafe, visiting every day, sitting in the same corner, ordering the same black coffee, and quietly watching Lena. At first, Lena kept her distance, but Ethan never gave up. Every day, he found ways to talk to her, sharing little stories about the cafe, about Sophie, about his travels over the past 2 years. He wasn't pushy, he didn't rush her. He was just there, slowly, patiently, making his presence a part of her life once more. And then, one day, when Lena unexpectedly laughed at one of his jokes, she realized that her heart had never truly let him go. One late afternoon, as the cafe was about to close, Ethan walked in with a bouquet of flowers. Lena looked up, slightly surprised. "What's the occasion?" she asked. Ethan smiled softly, stepping closer, looking directly into her eyes. "Lena, I lost you once, and I don't want to lose you again." Lena held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Ethan dropped to one knee, pulling out a small ring box from his pocket. "Lena, you can say no to me 100 times, and I will still be here loving you. Let me be with you. Let me take care of you and Sophie. Will you be my wife?" Lena stood frozen, her hands trembling slightly. She had once thought she would never open her heart again, but the man before her, still patient, still gentle, still loving her the same way he always had, was proving her wrong. And this time she knew she wouldn't let him go again. Lena smiled through her tears. "Yes." Ethan grinned, standing up and pulling her into his arms, as if he had finally found his way home. Not long after, they held a simple wedding, surrounded by only their closest loved ones. Lena wore an elegant white dress, Sophie joyfully scattered flower petals down the aisle, and Ethan stood at the altar, looking at her with nothing but love in his eyes. As they exchanged rings, Ethan whispered, "I once traveled far to find myself, but in the end, I realized my home has always been here, with you." Lena smiled, squeezing his hand, and in that moment, she knew that after everything, they had finally found their happy ending.